One thing I can respect about the Virgin New Adventures is how long it took them to get to a recognizable, reoccurring Doctor Who villain. The only classic Who villain to have popped up thus far was the War Chief, and it's not like the War Chief is a household name the way the Daleks or the Ice Warriors or the Master is. I'm sure there was a desire to slap a Centauran on the cover for marketing purposes, but the series has shown restraint, shown everyone it can stand on its own as new Doctor Who media. Okay, granted, rights issues were part of it. Terry Nation was being very protective of the Daleks at the time. Well, if you can't get the Daleks, you can always get Doctor Who's runner-up, the Cybermen. And who better to write about Cybermen than the leader of the Cybermen himself? This is Iceberg by David Banks. The year is 2006, and the planet Earth isn't doing great. Global warming, ozone depletion, and general air pollution is slowly eroding the environment. War and drought seem ceaseless, and overpopulation has resulted in so many new diseases that the world is just lumping them all under the category of the plague. You'd think the world has enough problems, but now something apocalyptic looms on the horizon. The inversion of Earth's magnetic field. If that were to happen, technology would fail, Earth's ecology would break down, and the human race would find themselves without protection from solar radiation. Thankfully, a team of military scientists based in Antarctica are working on Project Flipback, a massive device that'll keep the magnetic poles right where they belong. 20 years prior, the base the team was working out of, the Snowcap Tracking Station, was the site of an attack from mysterious assailants from a lost planet. Extraterrestrial cyborg soldiers known as Cybermen. The Cybermen were defeated thanks to someone only known as the Doctor, but not before the base's commander, General Cutler, was killed. Now, 2 decades later, his daughter, General Pamela Cutler, has taken over operations. To save the world, yes, but also to find out exactly what happened to her father, and why the United States government would be covering it up. Back in England, the cruise ship SS Elysium, converted from an old 1950s oil tanker, is making a 3-month-long voyage to the Antarctic Circle, one of the few places left on Earth where clean air and blue skies exist. One of the stars of this voyage is world-famous artist Michael Brack, who's been commissioned to make ice sculptures out of icebergs with a giant laser. If carving faces into the last few remaining ice drifts isn't the perfect symbol of man's hubris, I don't know what is. Also on the trip is Ruby Duvall, the famous crack reporter for the Sunday Seeker. Normally she would be doing something dangerous like uncovering gun runners, but this time she's going to take things easy, put on a fake name, and put her feet up and write a fluff piece about the trip. All seems to be going well. Ruby is relaxing, having fun, making friends, including Brack himself. But then Brack starts to act oddly. He's avoiding Ruby, slipping into the ship's bottom deck, which is off limit to passengers. Just what is going on down there? Well, Ruby's never one to turn away a mystery, so she manages to break into the lower levels. While exploring, she discovers a strange little man who calls himself the Doctor. It seems he's gotten himself separated from his TARDIS, whatever that might be. And all while this is happening, on the Antarctic ice, the Cybermen get ready to spring their trap. As we discussed last time, this book happens in parallel with the last one, Birthright, giving us the Doctor but no Betty and Ace story to match Birthright's Betty and Ace but no Doctor story. We talked about how Birthright was a very reflective story on just how far the Doctor's influence stretched, his stranglehold on space and time so secure that he controls the show even when he's not there. This book offers the inverse of that, but not from the angle you might expect. No, this isn't about the role companions play, how they keep the Doctor in check or anything like that, but instead shows us a story where the Doctor has virtually no influence. The Doctor in Iceberg is 100% flying by the seat of his pants, a much more classical model of the Doctor, but even more so because he doesn't even show up until past the halfway point. No, really. Outside of a few one-page references, the Doctor doesn't show up and become an active part of the story until page 142 of this 253-page book, which is almost always the first thing brought up in reviews, this one included, I guess. I don't think that's a problem in of itself. Here, the Doctor's absence serves as a function of suspense, like one of Alfred Hitchcock's time bombs. This is a Doctor Who book. You know the Doctor's going to show up eventually, but you don't know when exactly. You don't know how exactly. Just that when he does, There's going to be explosions. It's a type of pacing that you couldn't do in any incarnation of the television show, but it does lend itself decently to print. The problem comes in the larger context of the Virgin New Adventures. This book came right after a book where the Doctor didn't show up at all until the last page. In return, readers were expecting this book to be Oops, All Doctor. The main thing that not having Benny and Ace in the story accomplishes is to disengage it within a tighter continuity. We know, from publication order and references in other books, that Iceberg takes place between Birthright and Bloodheat. But if you took Iceberg on its own, you could place it pretty much anywhere on the Seventh Doctor's timeline. The Doctor never goes, "You know, Ace's Nitro 9 might be handy right now," or "I do miss Bernice's dry wit." The book doesn't name drop Ace or Benny at all. We don't even get the inversion of Birthright's final scene where the trio are reunited. Instead, we have something that would become pretty popular during the New Who holiday specials, the one and done companion. Here, the role is given to Ruby Duvall, and that idea might have motivated the Doctor's delayed entrance. If Ruby is going to be in the companion role for the story, and just this story, then maybe we should spend a lot of time developing her character so that she isn't some cardboard cutout standing next to our imagined version of Sylvester McCoy. And boy, do they give her backstory. The book opens before Ruby was even born, to show us what Ruby's mother was doing during the Cybermen's secret invasion of London in the 1970s. And we see her in 1986 at the age of 2 watching The Wizard of Oz on TV. We see her father get struck by a motorcyclist and become disabled, the stresses that put on Ruby and the family, and all the resentment she had growing up. She told them about her daddy coming home after a long time in the hospital, her growing up with him in a wheelchair, the funny American synthesized voice which he soon accepted as his, the terrible embarrassment as she grew a little older when friends came home to tea, offset by the pride she felt in having a famous father. She told of later times, the terrible tensions in the house, her mother struggling with his physical handicaps, fighting his stubborn, self-pitying streak, the Rose, his pioneering computing genius attracting international recognition, but not at first much money, the financial difficulties in the depths of the country's longest ever recession, the death of her mother from one of the plague diseases. So yeah, the now 21 going on 22 Ruby boards the SS Elysium with a lot of baggage, and being stuck on a cruise ship for 3 months gives you a lot of time to meditate. She spends a lot of her time on the ship alternating between the dusty old library, meditative sessions on the virtual reality machine, and learning Eastern philosophies from a couple of other passengers. There's actually a lot of philosophy talk on this cruise, the result of trapping a bunch of wealthy, quote-unquote, intellectuals in a confined space, especially philosophies that might interest the Cybermen. Heidegger, according to Mike Brack, thought society was becoming cybernetic. That is, things being done in a more efficient way. Efficiency is the goal, and justifying means. So people don't just run for the pleasure of it. They do it to get healthy. Same with food. They choose what to eat, not for the way it looks or tastes, but because it's high in energy. Heidegger said it was going to get worse. We'd get stuck in a dark age where efficiency was the be-all and end-all. Doctor Who is definitely one of those science fiction franchises that lends itself to philosophical ponderings. The action doesn't kick in until the Doctor enters the story, and it feels like a major gear shift, going from a light, talky Agatha Christie mystery to a fast, violence-filled monster movie, with the Doctor and Ruby bouncing around all over the place. And Ruby really isn't made for that. Her meeting the Doctor to the Cybermen being defeated and the Doctor leaving takes all of 6 hours, but she basically wilts at this point, becoming completely dependent on the Doctor, and she ends up losing a lot of her agency in the process. She goes from a crack investigative reporter to the companion stereotype, who's a bit helpless and trusts the Doctor completely, for whatever reason. "Your knowledge is commendable. You will be a valuable addition to the cyber cause." Ruby's heart went cold. It was back to the basics again. But the Doctor's reply made her blood run even colder. "Yes, I can quite see the potential." "Doctor!" she cried, horrified. 3 fingers dug dutifully into her shoulder. "I have something else to recycle here, Controller." The Doctor reached into his pocket and produced a palmful of separated links from Ruby's necklace. "This is gold. That's a metal, too. Extremely unreactive. Shall I throw it in?" There was a whirring as the Cyber Controller pondered. Clever old Doctor, Ruby thought. So he hasn't gone across to them. He's up to something. "Ruby, honey, you met this guy 3 hours ago. You don't know him, and to suddenly be sure as to what the Doctor is and what he might be doing is ridiculous. Clever old Doctor. By this point, the only clever thing Ruby's seen the Doctor do is trick a few Cybermen into falling off a cliff, which, that isn't nothing, but one moment does not a pattern make. Ruby is an investigative reporter. She should be both curious and distrusting of everything, but instead becomes a docile bit of luggage. Her characterization doesn't matter. Her past doesn't matter. Her skills do not matter. I wouldn't be surprised as the back half of this book was written first, with Ruby taking on the companion stereotype as her character hadn't been developed yet. Then all the characterization and backstory was worked out later in writing the first half, but then the back half wasn't rewritten to make it work. And it's not just Ruby that makes it feel this way. There are a ton of subplots, character arcs, and small details that set up things that have no payoff. Another big one is General Pamela Cutler. She's introduced early on as a major character, the daughter of the classic Who character, using her position to investigate the aftermath of a classic Doctor Who story. Like Ruby on the SS Elysium, she's trying to solve her own mystery, and she's on the front line against the story's most immediate threat, geomagnetic reversal. Side note, the book treats geomagnetic reversal as like a sudden event that only takes a few hours, but in reality it would happen over hundreds or even thousands of years. Anyway, General Cutler is basically a third protagonist after the Doctor and Ruby, but the book completely forgets about her in the second half. She doesn't find her answers, her character arc doesn't conclude, and she doesn't factor into the story's resolution. A lot of stuff in this book happens off-screen, if you'll allow the film term. One of this book's most bizarre subplots involves a terrorist being arrested on the Elysium and held in the lower decks. He makes an escape attempt and presumably falls overboard. And that's it. It has nothing to do with the plot, nothing to do with the Elysium mystery or the Snowcap mystery or the Cybermen. But even worse, we never even get to see any of it. We don't see the terrorist. That entire subplot plays out in dialogue after the fact. First officer here, sir. From the bridge. Sorry to wake you. FF has reported an attempted escape by the terrorist. Trench was now fully awake. Have they caught the blighter? No, sir. Think he went overboard. One of the lifeboats on the starboard sun deck had been released. Found dangling over the side. Secured again now. So he tried to take a boat and ended up in the drink. Looks like it, sir. This book is structured so weird, you guys. It actually tricked me into thinking it had a lot more ideas under the hood than it actually had. The first couple of chapters have this weird art bleeding into life motif that I thought was surely going somewhere. For example, we have toddler Ruby watching The Wizard of Oz, while at the same time a man reads a newspaper article about a billionaire whose nickname is The Wizard of Oz. Ruby's father is struck by a masked motorcyclist that looks exactly like a contemporary comic book character called the Faceless Biker, as if the fictional character was sprung to life from the pages of 2000 AD. Okay, I thought, there's some time travel thing involving that motorcyclist, or the Cybermen are fussing about in the land of fiction, or something. But no, it's just a pointless coincidence. We do find out who the motorcyclist is, but it doesn't mean anything to the plot. Though, now this has got me thinking about a Doctor Who Kamen Rider crossover. Man, that'd be awesome. The Wizard of Oz motif continues throughout the whole book. It's the theme of the cruise, culminating in a costume party, and oh my god, Ruby is named after the ruby slippers. I just got that. Fuck me. But I'm hard-pressed to find any parallels between L. Frank Baum and Iceberg. It wouldn't have been impossible. Escaping a bleak existence and finding yourself in a more magical setting, only to discover it's super dangerous and maybe home isn't all that bad. It would hardly be the first time Doctor Who evoked the Wizard of Oz. Guys, Ace's real name is Dorothy Gale McShane. It's frustrating. The characters are interesting, the story beats are interesting, the ideas and philosophies presented are interesting, which all suggest a very creative person behind the story. But the abysmal execution also suggests someone not exactly experienced in writing long-form storytelling. Someone in a creative field, but that field isn't writing. An actor, perhaps? David Banks was born in 1951 in Hull, England. A drama student at Manchester University, Banks broke into television in 1980 with minor roles in shows like The Cuckoo Waltz, Keep It in the Family, and The Professionals. In 1981, Doctor Who was looking to bring the Cybermen back in a big way. The last time the Cybermen hit the screen was in Revenge of the Cybermen in 1975, Tom Baker's first season, and, well, let's just say it was an all-time classic. Earthshock was going to bring the Cybermen back in a huge way, with a massive Star Wars-inspired space epic that'll leave the TARDIS crew changed forever. It was decided that the Cybermen were going to be given a standout leader character, a cyber leader, if you will, and went about casting the role. My agent wasn't sure that I should be appearing behind a mask and was rather dismissive. However, I thought the part had possibilities and was excited at the prospect of being in Doctor Who. I had an idea how the part could be played, and when I read it, I think Peter Grimwad agreed. Or perhaps I was just the right height. The height part was important. You had to be at least 6'3" to be cast as Cyberman, which Banks just managed to be. Imagine, if genetics had stunted Banks' height by just 1 inch, we might not be here today talking about this book. Earthshock aired in 1982 and left quite an impact for a number of reasons, but Banks' performance as a cyber leader got notable attention from the Doctor Who fan community, even in otherwise negative reviews of the story. The fact that Earthshock was the first cyber story since 1975, and had a cast able to carry it, covered up the gaping holes in the storyline. Top of the list was David Banks, a refreshing variation on the archetypical alien task force leader. Whilst he left no doubts about his evil qualities, his wry logic gave him a perversely endearing quality because of Banks' clever voice and understated body movements, an indication that there is some humanity left inside the Cybermen. Banks would return to the role of the cyber leader for every classic Who Cyberman appearance after this. The Five Doctors, Attack of the Cybermen, Silver Nemesis. Banks became part of the Doctor Who family, and as time moved on, 2 things happened. One was Banks becoming invested in Doctor Who fandom, introduced to him via Colin Baker. Colin was discovering the conventions, and he came back asking, "Why aren't you going to the conventions?" I hadn't been asked, but he explained that he'd said he was doing this Cyberman story, and people had asked who was playing the cyber leader, and when he said David Banks, everyone applauded. So I realized there were actually people who read the credits as they watched it. The second thing that happened was Banks' increased interest in Cybermen. For the last handful of years of Doctor Who's run, Banks became something of a Cyberman expert, being brought in to show new actors how to play these cyborg villains, and he began writing and pitching his own Cyberman stories for the show. None of them were picked up, but one of them might sound familiar.
Could you tell us a bit more about the 2 stories that you submitted to the BBC?
Yes, one in fact was set in the late 20th century on Antarctica, following up certain hints in the first story, 10th Planet, which was set in Antarctica as well. It had a massive liner in it, a passenger liner, with about 2,000 passengers, and I suspect that was a bit beyond the BBC's budget, so that's why it wasn't accepted.
Yep, this is another case of turning my failed script into a book. Banks' interest in Cybermen and his introduction to the greater Doctor Who fandom led him to work on another project, one that would come out in 1990, a year after Doctor Who's cancellation. Doctor Who Cybermen is one part behind-the-scenes history of the show, one part essay on the nature of the Cybermen, and one part fictional history of the Cybermen themselves, full of fan theorizing. Look at this. Look at this. This is some Zelda timeline crap. This book has so many details and tries so hard to make the Cybermen work as a unified concept. I know at least one person who used it as a reference book for their Doctor Who tabletop game. I suppose we should really get into what Cybermen are and what makes them so complicated. Within the mythos of Doctor Who, Cybermen originated from Earth's twin planet Mondas, which later broke orbit and was sent spiraling out of the solar system. The humans on Mondas' surface began to develop advanced cybernetic technology that gradually replaced their organic body parts, stripping them of emotions in the process. They spread across the galaxy under the pretense that emotions are weakness, biology is weakness, everything should be converted. The issue, one that's either a problem or an opportunity depending on your position, is that there's no real consistency in the Cybermen. Not in their history, not in their motives, and especially not in their visual design. Let's compare them to the Daleks. Visually, the production staff nailed the Daleks right out of the gate. Iconic and alien. And it's barely changed over the last 50 plus years. The few times it has, well, it didn't stick. Likewise, the Daleks have represented extreme fascism since day one, and while backstory and details have been added to the Daleks over time, this new material still pointed the Daleks in the direction of extreme fascism. Visually, the Cybermen change constantly, starting off as these fabric and plastic tubing Frankenstein creations, gradually becoming more robotic, sleeker, and then bulkier, and then sleeker again. You can say their technology is becoming more advanced and that's why they're changing, but then you have the complication of more advanced Cybermen showing up earlier in the show's continuity. These guys are from 1986. These guys are from 1979. And these guys are from 2070. Some of this can be hand-waved away with time travel, but not all of it. Banks suggests factions breaking off and developing independently from each other across the galaxy. Likewise, what the Cybermen actually represent changed with time. Anxiety over artificial limbs and organ transplants faded away with time. Well, maybe the Cybermen are now about the rise of the computer, the logical brain taking over everything. No, everyone seems cool with computers now. Oh, how about the evils of racial purity? We'll put the Cybermen side by side with neo-Nazis and ask if they're really all that different. Oh, it's the 2000s now. What if the Cybermen were about those dang kids and their newfangled phones? The Cybermen have only continued to lose focus over the years. A Big Finish audio story from 2002 called Spare Parts has further expanded on the Cybermen's origins as an extreme act of survival. And then New Who came along and introduced alternate universe Cybermen. They look and act just like the Cybermen of old, but are completely unrelated. And now you have no idea if the Cybermen you're looking at are from the original universe or the alternate universe. And I still don't know where World Enough and Time fits in all of this. They're a colony ship separated from Mondas, but they invent the Cybermen independently of Mondas, and the Cybermen look exactly the same and follow the same path of technological advancements as the original Mondas Cybermen? What? Oh, and you had the Borg now, which were like the Cybermen, but, heavy metal and cool and made the Cybermen look really lame. While Banks' Cybermen book might have been the most comprehensive guide thus far, it's become too out of date to be considered a canonical source. And what of the Cybermen in Iceberg? God, I don't know. I pored over the Cybermen book and the wikis and the fan sites, and I'm still not sure exactly where this fits into the timeline. And I'm not alone, even the Doctor loses track. Sorry about the gold, I got my Cybermen mixed up. Each type seems to have different strengths and weaknesses. He was floating disembodied in the stream of melting ice. A gigantic gold chain was twined around his neck in place of his paisley scarf. The Cybermen from Mondas hated radiation. It seized them up. But this lot are the first invasion from Planet 14. Radiation doesn't bother them. Never occurred to me that they might be impervious to gold. The two things this book tries to add to the Cybermen mythos is the origin of the Cyber Controller, those guys with the big cone heads, and the Cybermats, the Cybermen's little multitask pets. Apparently the Cybermats are modeled off of bugs found in the Antarctic. Big whoop. This would be David Banks' only book for the Virgin New Adventures. He continued to act, small roles. He's written a few plays. Oh, wait, The Ultimate Adventure. The hardcore fans wouldn't forgive me if I didn't mention The Ultimate Adventure, a semi-official 1989 stage play written by Terrence Dicks that saw John Pertwee return to the role of the Third Doctor. David Banks was in that as well, and when Pertwee fell ill, Banks stepped up in the role of the Doctor, making him kind of an unofficial Eighth Doctor of sorts. It's not really relevant here, but it's the one other big thing Banks is known for, and since we won't be seeing Banks again in the series, I figured I should bring it up. Iceberg is a book with a lot of interesting ideas buried under a structural mess. A lot of that is on Banks, yes, but it's also a failure of literary editing. There are so many loose threads, so many setups without payoffs that I'm not even sure everyone on staff of Virgin even read it. I wouldn't call it the worst book in the line, not by a long shot. It's not remotely as gross as Time Worm Genesis, and it's not nearly as incompetent as The Pit, but it might be the biggest disappointment up to now, because these setups are really strong. The moment-to-moment prose are solid, and there are hints of something weirder going on under the hood, not to mention the whole parallel with Birthright thing. But it seems to forget to deliver on any of this. Birthright is more sloppy in the moment-to-moment. Not every idea lands and the action writing isn't stellar, but it's so much more satisfying because it pays off its big ideas and makes sure that every character, every action, every theme and idea are important to the whole. There's a good book hidden somewhere in Iceberg, but this isn't it. If you're gonna pick up a David Banks book, you're much better off with Doctor Who Cybermen. It's better put together, it's got more historical value, and it has some killer artwork. Iceberg, you can just skip entirely. Next time, we begin a new multi-book story arc. The Doctor, Ace, and Benny find themselves in an alternate timeline and meet some old friends. They're not doing so hot.